Hi, everybody. My name's Eileen. I'm a compulsive eater. I weigh and measure 3 meals a day off the gray sheet, write them down, commit them to my sponsor. Don't eat in between, no matter what. And abstinence is the most important thing in the world to me. And my abstinence date is January 25th, 2015. Um,
Wow.
so thank you very much for asking me to share my experience, strength, and hope. And the way I was taught was to spend a little time talking about what it used to be like, then talking about what happened, and then talking about what it's like now. So that's what I'll do. And I have no idea what's going to come out today. Um, so what it used to be like, I grew up in a family that was riddled by depression, alcoholism, uh, long-term chronic illness, and some domestic violence. And as a result, I chose to, no, I found food as a really good way for me to comfort myself. And I didn't know that that's what I was doing. I just knew that my relationship with food was different from everybody else's in my family. And we had a lot of crazies in my family. But my sisters and I, um, did different things. And I used to crawl around and look into the cupboards and find this jar of something that was bottle of something that was like a liquid sugar that my mom would use in baking. And I would drink it out of the bottle. And I think I must have been 4 or something like that when I was doing that. My dad ran the bingo game um, at his organization. And so he would have these big boxes of packets of sugar. And I found that box, which is usually on the bottom of a closet, on the floor of a closet. And I would go into that closet, shut the door, and eat those packets one by one, paper and all. And, I that's what I did. And I remember one of my sisters finding me in there one time and she looked at me and she said, "You eat the paper too?" And I said, "Yeah, it's not bad." And that was all that was said. It wasn't reported to anybody, nobody, anyway. And, fast forward, when I came home from college to visit my family, I must have said hello to everybody, but my first thing was to go to the refrigerator, open the door, and get reacquainted. And that was the most important place for me in my home. I would scrounge for change in cushions, and I would um, find it in the floor of the car, anything that I could put together to bring down to my corner market, which was called Sadie's, to get some penny stuff, and I would just buy as much as I could and fill up a bag and eat it all the way home. And I would do that over and over again. And at the time, you could return bottles, beer bottles, you could get 7 cents for, and regular bottles just 5 cents for. And I would do that, not because I was into recycling, mind you, at that time. Recycling wasn't even a word, I don't think, back then. But so I had an unusual relationship with sugar, and I would eat it all the time whenever I could. And I rarely was hungry at mealtime. And my family was kind of militant about cleaning off your plate. So I would sit there for hours, it felt like, while everybody else was watching Lassie and the Jetsons and the Flintstones on TV. And I had to sit there until I finished all of the food on my plate, which, if they gave me dessert, I would have been the first one out, but I just didn't like the food that was regular food as much. I didn't have a problem with weight. As a matter of fact, the cafeteria ladies tried to get me to gain weight. I was a skinny little kid. I was a very picky kind of eater. If I could have just lived on sugar alone, I would have. Um, and it didn't hit me until puberty when other things hit me, like feelings and emotions that I couldn't control. And up until then, I was trying to be a really good girl because, you know, people got spanked and, I didn't want punishment. And I went to a school where they had Catholic nuns who believed firmly in corporal punishment. And they used to hit me. And I thought, I'm a good kid. Like, what are you hitting me for? But they did. And so I was trying to be a good kid and avoid getting into trouble. And um, yeah. And I wasn't really a happy little kid. I really wasn't. I would spend as much time on my own as I could. I would take the long way home from school. Um, and I wanted to be popular. I wanted to have friends, but I didn't understand why kids would get mad at me about something. And I didn't have any idea how to deal with conflict on the playground or anything like that. And my parents would just say, my mom used to say, "Oh, they're just jealous because you can play the piano and they can't." And that kind of advice wasn't helpful at all to me because the kids just they were just mean sometimes, and I didn't have any kind of way to come back at them. I was just defenseless. And so I would go and find happiness or some kind of equilibrium with my food. Um, and then when I got to puberty, I really wanted to have boyfriends and be popular. And I was looking at all those magazines that told me I had to be a certain body type, which I wasn't, and I'm still not. And so, you know, I just knew that I wasn't okay the way I was. My sister, mind you, was a beauty queen. Literally, she was a beauty queen. But I couldn't compete in that area, and I wasn't cool. I'm still not cool. I opt for warm these days, but cool was just not in my bag of tricks. And so I just I would diet. I would go on these diets and then I would lose enough weight so that I felt like I was skinny enough to maybe merit a boyfriend. But if I got a boyfriend, they were just as confusing as girlfriends were at the time. I mean, I thought if you were a girl, now this is how screwed up my thinking was. I thought in seventh, eighth grade, I was supposed to find a boyfriend who would one day marry me. I mean, that's what it all seemed to be about. You just got somebody to like you, and then you just stayed with them and stayed together. Now, I think I was the only one in my whole school, in my whole world that thought that way, but that's how I approached every single relationship. And I got to tell you, boys were very disappointing. They never had that idea. They couldn't care less, who I was. And so as soon as they started disappointing me, I would go back to eating sugar. And when in puberty, I couldn't hide the weight anymore. The pounds started coming on. So I started yo-yo dieting. When I got too lonely, and I would diet down to an acceptable weight, what I thought might be an acceptable weight. And then I'd get a boyfriend, and then they would be just totally perplexing to me and would either want to go out with somebody else that gave them a little more in the backseat of the car than I did because I wanted to be a really good little girl. Yeah, I mean, you just couldn't win for losing in my world. You just couldn't. And so what I did notice in high school was that the girls that drank and that went to parties and let boys do whatever they wanted, got pregnant and never left town. And in my world, the most important goal that I had was to leave Torrington, Connecticut, was to leave it behind me forever, was to leave that factory town and those people and go away. As a matter of fact, when I walked home from school, they were putting up a brand new apartment building. And I remember being in third and fourth grade and thinking, wow, a one, two bedroom, three-bedroom apartment. I wonder how old you have to be to get one of those. But the idea of living by myself was so exciting to me. But of course, that didn't happen. So, what I saw people being successful at leaving Torrington, Connecticut did was they went away to school, they went to college. And so I spent all of my high school free periods in the guidance office looking through colleges, finding scholarship applications, making sure that I got grades that were good enough to go to college. 5 minutes, thank you. And I got my dream. I got into college. And as soon as I got my acceptance, I was like, oh, now I guess I don't have to be that good a girl anymore because I'm in college. I'm getting out of here. So I started drinking. And as soon as I started drinking, I was a mess. Because honestly, I have this disease with the liquid kind of alcohol, as well as the solid kind, which is our program. So anyway, somehow I got through college and up and down the scale I went, up and down the scale I went, all through my life. Um, and I remember the only time I could relax was when I got married right after college. That was like grade 13. I went to college. I graduated from college. The next thing was get a husband, get married, have a baby. I did all of those things. But when I was pregnant, I got to the point where the scale was going to just keep climbing no matter what I did. And I'd gain weight no matter what I did. And people gave me the excuse that I was now eating for two. So I started doing that some more. And uh, totally, I mean, I was already overweight before I got pregnant. I just kept gaining weight. And I got to like a couple 100 pounds and I stopped weighing myself anymore. I remember gaining like 13 pounds 1 month. And even my OBGYN said, you might be, that might be pushing it a little. Anyway, it was when my daughter, I never could lose the baby weight. And when my daughter was about 2.5 or so, I saw my next door neighbor who seemed to have lost half of her body weight overnight. It was probably over the winter months when she did it, but I asked her how she lost the weight, and she told me that she went to Overeaters Anonymous. And so I went with her. And at that Overeaters Anonymous meeting, they used the Gray Sheet food plan to lose weight. This was back in the mid 1980s. And I found for the first time I was using a food plan that I didn't get hungry in between.
Mm.
And I wasn't just dying until I could see the right number on the scale so I could start eating again, which is how I approached every diet that I ever did. So I lost like 40 pounds. Now I was in my mid 30s. I lost 40 pounds in 4 months. And I thought, thank you very much. I'm good now. I got this. And so I started not calling my sponsor, not going to meetings, not weighing and measuring my food. They put me on a maintenance food plan, which was supposed to reintroduce me to carbs in a healthy way. And I can safely say, looking back on that time, that carbs and I would never need a reintroduction. I mean, we were fast friends. We were totally devoted to each other. And still to this day, I cannot trust myself with grains and sugar and the carbs that are not on the gray sheet. So was back to up and down, up and down, and up and down. And finally, in 1995, I hit some kind of a wall. And it was because I was doing the steps out of the big book in AA. I really think that I got some clarity that I needed to go to the gray sheet meetings. Boy, by this time, I knew what gray sheet was. I knew the difference between OA and gray sheet. And I knew I wanted nothing to do with gray sheet because they kept bringing their scale out in public. And they did this and they would say 1 minute without exception. And I thought that was just nuts. And I was afraid of you people. I was afraid to become like you people. I couldn't imagine taking my scale out in public. And now that I've got only a few seconds left, what I need to say is that today I weigh and measure my food from the gray sheet because it gives me peace and contentment and sanity and serenity. And because I love my food, I have learned in this program to make food that appeals to me so I don't have to feel deprived. I have learned how to negotiate with people in my life so they know that if they're going to go out to eat with me, they're going to have to go with my scale and my backup and everything else that I need. And if they don't, then we don't eat together. That's just it. That's my time. I am so glad to be here and thank you so much. And welcome to you, day counters, newcomers. We need you so badly in this program. Thank you.